This first plant, Chelone glabra, is known around here as turtle head because of the way the flower heads remind people of the heads of a turtle. These flowers are about 2.5 to 3 inches in size, and they grow in a little cluster like that. They're sort of reminiscent in some ways of a snapdragon. Here's a picture of what this plant would look like in its native setting. Although it's has just one upright stem, it usually tends to kind of flop over. So you can see how that plant is sort of leaning over. And to the right here, where that dark area is water. So these plants are almost always found growing along stream banks in a very deep shaded area. These are right in front of my house, the plants that I'm showing you the pictures of. So let's look at the botany of this plant for a minute. It's in the same family as our plantain, and what we know about plantain as an herb is that it's a very soothing vulnerary that is often used topically to reduce skin inflammation and ease irritation of the skin. So we're going to see that turtle head also has that same activity, although it has a lot of other uses as well. Some people around here call this plant snakehead or turtle bloom, and in the European herbal books you will read about it as balmony. So this is very common throughout our region. I see it quite a bit, even further up north. I've seen it in New York State and Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania. Those are some of the places, and it's always in a wet place. It's one of the plants, and we have several tonight we're going to look at that. What I would say about them is that they like to have their feet wet. So when you see a place with a lot of plant diversity and there's a creek or a stream through it, that's when you're going to look for this plant. It doesn't bloom until late summer, usually stops blooming just before the first frost. A couple of feet tall, as you see here. The leaves are sessile, which means they're usually attached right to the stem of the leaf, or very short stemmed if they do have some. They're opposite, and it has a square stem. So this is a good example of a plant that has a square stem, but it isn't a mint. So we know that all mints have square stems, but not all square stems belong to mints. And a couple of plants you might see growing around this plant would be cardinal flower, which is Lobelia cardinalis, which has bright red flowers, also blooms about the same time. Jewelweed, I'm totally blanking. Impatiens capensis, and then green coneflower, which is a rudbeckia. Those are three of the plants that grow around it here. And one of the things that I like to make sure that my students learn about when we're out looking at plants is how to not only identify individual plants, but understand the importance of plant communities. When you go out into a setting for the first time in nature and you see a lot of things flowering and a lot of bushes, and the diversity looks like, you know, it's intact and that it's a very thriving forest or an open field or a sunny area. One of the things that I think is so important is if you can identify one or two plants in that area, that will begin to give you some clues about what other plants are likely to be found there, because they also enjoy that same kind of habitat. We harvest turtlehead when it's in flower, which is usually August and September. So usually as soon as you see this, you can see on the one here on the left, there's a few buds and a few open flowers. I tend to harvest it as soon as 2 or 3 flowers are open on each plant. I don't wait for it to, for all of them to go into flower, because then I'd have quite a few faded ones. And when I say aerial parts, I'm talking about everything from the ground up. So I have, when I harvest fresh a turtle head, I usually make things out of it immediately. We'll talk about some of those preparations in a minute. It is a very bitter herb. We'll see as we look into some of its actions. And it is available dry, and you can also do a lot of the same things with it that I'm talking about. So turtle head is an example, because it's so bitter, of an herb that has a very stimulating effect on liver secretions. So one of the a very common imbalance that might be described when someone is thinking about health assessment from a traditional Chinese perspective are issues that have to do with constrained liver qi or liver stagnation, which would basically be a way of describing the fact that certain secretions, certain movement of blood and energy or qi around the body are not happening as they should be, and things are stagnating. Usually you see problems with digestion because the liver is not secreting sufficient amounts of bile. You also can see a lot of problems with hormone balance in women, lots of issues with just overall digestive function and assimilation, and then very frequently skin problems, eruptions, and chronic constipation. So many of those liver element, wood element, or liver imbalances would be addressed by an herb like turtle head, because it stimulates the liver and increases the flow of blood and qi throughout the body. It's also a very strong digestive bitter. What you may or may not know is that the taste of bitterness on your tongue, when you pick up a leaf and you chew it and your tongue registers that flavor in the mouth, a whole series of physiological reactions occur as a result of that. And the taste of bitterness is probably one of the most therapeutic flavors that you could give to anyone, because what it does, and David Hoffman used to say that when you taste bitter, every tissue that squirts. So all of the secretions in the body are stimulated, and particularly digestive secretions. So the taste of bitterness is really critical for not only good digestion, but the counterpart to good digestion, which is assimilation. So often people really focus on being able to digest their food or not having any symptoms of indigestion, but the other counterpart of that is what happens when the food that you eat passes out of the stomach into the small and large intestine, and how well do those two organs work to actually break down and assimilate the nutrients you've eaten, and then also transit any waste matter out of the body. So an herb like turtlehead is very activating for the whole process of digestion. It stimulates secretions from the mouth all the way through the gut. And when people have symptoms of poor liver function, they're going to have indigestion, they're going to have bloating, gas, they're going to maybe belch a little bit after they eat. They might even have things like gastric reflux or hiatal hernia. So lots of lethargy after meals, so people who eat and then 20 minutes later they just feel like they can't stay awake anymore. Those are people who would really benefit from an herb like turtlehead. And usually we give an herb like this with meals. So you would drink a little bit of the tincture or some of the tea right before you eat to sort of signal your digestive system that pretty soon you're going to be eating now and that it should get ready to take care of business. So back to turtlehead, we could say from a Western perspective that it's also used for jaundice, hepatitis, inflammation of the gallbladder, people who have gallstones. And flipping over then into a more TCM perspective, we would be talking about damp heat, so that there's excess secretions of dampness. Usually with the digestive system, we're talking about mucus, and heat in both of those systems. And so there's a lot of inflammation of tissues and possibly even infections going on when those those conditions exist together, the dampness and the heat. We also use it for what's called deficient stomach fire. So that basically means that someone doesn't have enough digestive qi to really break down and assimilate their food. And that is often, you often see that symptom in a couple categories. You can see that when someone has, they have just their diet is wrong for them. They're eating too many cold foods or too many processed foods. And you can also see it when someone has overall deficiency. So we would call that deficient kidney yang. So they don't have the metabolic warmth in their body that helps them break down and digest the food that they eat. We would also use it for stagnant liver and stagnant stomach qi, so just activating both of those organs. And then topically, it would be something that we would use just like you might think about using plantain. So in a fresh poultice or in a salve for painful inflammations of the skin. Usually hot, eruptive skin conditions are where we would think about using turtle head. If any of you have had any experience with the herb, with the bark of fringe tree, which is a common eastern woodland plant, turtle head is almost completely interchangeable. Those two herbs have such similar activity that if you saw a formula that calls for fringe tree, you could actually switch over and use turtle head and pretty much get the same results. Because it does stimulate the movement of qi, particularly in the pelvic region, it would be contraindicated in pregnancy. That's one thing you don't want to do, is get a lot of qi and blood moving around in the pelvis in pregnancy. And here are a few dosage suggestions. I usually tincture this with 50% alcohol. Start out with a low dose of tincture in some tea or some warm water. And the reason I always use warm water with a digestive bitter is because that warmth also increases the digestive process. But if someone's going to take this herb as a tonic, they could just take the 10 to 30 drops a couple times a day in water, and usually for 6 months or longer to stimulate digestion. Of course, if someone's digestive problems had to do with overall deficiency and just lack of kidney yang that was impairing their ability to digest their food, that would have to be resolved, because that would be the deeper issue, and the turtle head would be a more superficial way of managing the symptoms until you could address the real root of the problem. You can also make it into a tea, but to be honest with you, because of its bitterness, this is a good example of what I would say is an herb that only someone with a strong commitment to herbal medicine would want to drink this on a regular basis. Salves, kind of the way you would expect, just make a standard salve or use the fresh or dyed plant as a poultice. I sometimes combine this with peppermint or licorice or any other carminatives that are going to promote and warm the digestive tract. If I suspect a lot of liver stagnation or inflammation of the liver, some of the other herbs I might combine it with would be the dandelion root, golden seal, yellow root, or licorice. Not all of those together, but some combination of those. And if I'm looking at an overall situation with deficiency, I might think about American ginseng, Asian ginseng, and schizandra. So all three of those, or one or two of those, might be used as the tonic, while turtle head was used at meal times to promote good digestion.